The moon hung full and low over the courtyard of Caldrek, and every soul in the pack had come to watch the Alpha King choose his Luna. Rienne stood at the end of the long line of eligible women, her spine straight, her hands folded, her heart beating so hard she was certain the wolves nearest her could hear it. She had waited her whole life for this night. Everyone had told her it belonged to her. She had been 17 when the old Alpha died, and Corvin took the crown. She had stood at his side through the morning, through the first hard winter of his rule, through the border raids that had nearly broken the pack. When he could not sleep, it was Rienne he walked with, beneath the pines. When the council doubted him, it was her quiet voice that steadied the room. The whole of Caldrek spoke of it as a settled thing, the king and the girl who had never once left him. It was not a question of whether he would choose her, only of when. And yet, Rienne carried a shame the pack did not speak of aloud, though every one of them knew it. Her wolf had never come. The other girls had shifted at 13, at 14. Their young bones singing with the change under the first moon that claimed them. Rienne had knelt in the frost year after year and felt nothing. No fur, no fang, no second self rising to meet the light. She was, in the cruel and careful word the pack used behind their hands, silent. A Luna was meant to be the strong second heart of a pack, the mother of a bloodline. What use to anyone was a Luna who could not shift? She lifted her chin against the thought, the way her mother had taught her before the fever took her. Whatever they say, do not let them see it land. She let her eyes move over the courtyard she had known her whole life. The worn stone, the iron braziers, the high dark pines beyond the wall that had kept every secret she had ever carried. She and Corvin had walked those pines as children, before he was a king and she was a shame, back when the future had seemed a simple and generous thing. She could still find the exact hollow where he had once told her, half laughing, that whatever he became, he would need her beside him to survive it. She had held that sentence in her chest for 11 years like a coal. She was afraid to let go cold. Something felt wrong tonight, and she could not name it. There was a new weight in the courtyard, a satisfaction among the elders that had not been there a week ago. She had seen the cause arrive that morning. Saskia of Threnholt, tall and golden and certain, had ridden in at the head of her father's riders, and old Verum the warlord had ridden beside her with the look of a man come to collect a debt. Threnholt held the mountain passes Caldrek had bled over for a generation. Rienne had watched the council greet them and had felt for the first time the cold edge of a question she had never let herself ask. What if the pack needed a wolf more than the king wanted a bride? Across the courtyard, near the visiting delegations, a young man in gray and silver caught her eye and inclined his head. He was a stranger, an envoy from the distant kingdom of Vialmora, come to witness the choosing as a courtesy between far lands. He had spoken to her only once, that afternoon, when she had dropped her mother's pendant in the crush of the crowd, and he had knelt in the mud to return it, saying nothing at all about who she was or was not. Now, seeing her alone at the end of the line, he gave her a small nod, as though to say, "Courage." She did not even know his name. She was grateful to him all the same. The drums began. Corvin stepped into the center of the courtyard, and the sight of him stole the breath from her chest, the way it always had. He was tall and dark-haired and broad through the shoulders, a thin scar through his lip from a wound she had cleaned herself. He wore the black of the Alpha and the plain silver circlet of the crown. And when the firelight moved across his face, she thought, as she had thought 1,000 times, and never once said, "There is no one else. There has never been anyone else." She felt it then, the pull. That low and wordless tug beneath her ribs that she had carried since the night they first walked the pines. As children, the thing she had never dared to name, because she had no wolf to name it with. The elders said the true bond spoke wolf to wolf, scent to scent, and hers had no voice, but she felt it all the same, and she let herself believe, this once, that he felt it too. The king began to walk the line. He moved slowly, pausing before each woman, and the crowd held its breath at every step. She had imagined this moment so many times in the dark that living it felt like stepping into a dream she already knew the end of. In the dream he stopped in front of her. In the dream, he said her name the way he said it in the pines, low and certain, as though it were the only name he had ever learned. Rien watched him come and let the dream carry her one last little way. 10 paces away, she pressed her folded hands together until the knuckles ached. Please, she thought, though she was not certain to whom. Please let it be what everyone has always said. 8 paces. She could see the muscle working in his jaw, the way it moved when he was carrying something heavy and would not set it down. 6 paces. For one long moment, the whole world narrowed to that alone. His gaze on her, dark and steady, and something in it she could not read, something that looked almost like grief, and then he looked past her. Corvin stopped before Saskia of Threnholt. Rien did not understand it at first. Her mind refused the picture in front of her, the king standing before the golden woman, 3 places up the line, his back half turned to the girl everyone had promised he would choose. The courtyard had gone very quiet. Even the drums had stopped. Then Corvin spoke, and his voice carried to the farthest wall. I take Saskia of Threnholt as Luna of Caldrak, he said, that our packs may be one blood, and our borders one border, and our children may never again bury their fathers over the mountain passes. The cheer that went up was enormous, and it was the cheer that broke her. It was not the polite murmur of a pack surprised, it was relief. They had wanted this. Somewhere in a room she had not been invited to, this had already been decided, and the whole courtyard had known before she did. She understood at last what the weight in the air had been. It had been pity, held back until the naming was done. Saskia inclined her head, gracious and composed, and set her hand in the king's. Varim the warlord smiled the smile of a man collecting his debt. Rien stood at the end of the line and did not move. She would not fold, she would not weep where they could see. Her mother's voice held her upright from beyond the grave. Do not let them see it land. So she kept her chin high and her hands still, and she let the whole of Caldrak watch her not break, because it was the last gift she had left to give herself. Around her the pack was already turning away, already folding the girl who could not shift into the past tense. She heard the whispers begin before she had even moved. The soft and certain cruelty of people who had made up their minds long ago and were only now permitted to say so. Of course he chose the Threnholt girl. What did the Silent One imagine would happen? A king cannot wed a wolfless bride. Treaty or no treaty, heart or no heart. She had spent her whole life not hearing such things. She found she could not stop hearing them now. Corvin turned then, as if he could not help it, and looked at her across the courtyard. His face was a wound, his mouth opened. For one terrible moment, she thought he would say her name in front of all of them, and she did not know which would be worse, that he speak or that he stay silent. He found her afterward in the cold passage behind the great hall. When the feasting had started without her, he caught her wrist as she passed. Rien, he said, and his voice was not a king's voice at all. Let me explain it to you. Let me tell you why. She looked down at his hand on her wrist, at the place where the pull still lived beneath her skin even now, and she made herself feel nothing. You are the alpha, she said. You do not owe me your reasons. You owe your pack a Luna who can give it strength. She could not, and everyone knew she could not, so there was nothing to explain. That is, not why, he said, low and fierce. That was never why. Then why? She asked, and for one breath, she let herself hope, and hated herself for it. He did not answer. He stood there with her wrist in his hand and the whole of his silence between them, a man carrying something heavy who would not, even now, set it down. And that silence told her everything the naming had not. Whatever the reason was, it was one he would not fight for. It was one he had already surrendered to. She drew her wrist from his grip, gently, the way you take a blade from a sleeping man. I hope she makes you happy, Rien said, and she meant it, and it cost her more than anything had ever cost her. Then she walked away down the cold passage, and did not look back, and Corvin let her go, which was the cruelest thing he had ever done. That night, she did not sleep. She sat at her window and watched the torches burn down in the courtyard where she had been promised a life. She thought of the pines. She thought of every winter she had studied him, every counsel she had talked back from the edge of some ruin. Every night, she had given him her strength and asked for nothing because she had believed she would one day be given everything. She thought of the pole beneath her ribs that had lied to her, or that she had lied to herself about. She no longer knew which. It did not matter now. A bond that would not be fought for was not a bond. It was only a wound that had learned to speak. She understood, sitting there, that if she stayed, she would spend the rest of her days watching him love another woman and calling it duty. She would stand at Saskia's shoulder and steady that rein the way she had steadied this one, and she would grow old and gray and useful and quietly hollowed out, and the pack would praise her for it. She would become the sad and faithful thing they already believed her to be. She would rather die in the snow a stranger than live as that. By the gray hour before dawn, she had made her choice. When the maids came to her chamber at first light, the bed was made, and the hearth was cold. Her mother's pendant was gone from its hook. The window stood open to the frost. There was no note, no torn cloak on the briars, no track any hunter of Caldrec could follow. The girl who had never once left the king was simply gone, as though the mountain had opened in the dark and taken her, and by the time anyone thought to look, there was nothing left of Rien to find. 3 years is a long time in the life of a pack. Far to the south, past the mountain passes and the grey rivers, past the last of the lands that owed Caldrec anything, lay the kingdom of Valemora. And in the 3rd autumn, after a girl vanished from a northern courtyard, its people gathered in a very different square to watch a very different woman. She stood on the steps of the high hall in a coat of deep green and silver, and the crowd did not hold its breath in pity. It held its breath in awe. Word had come from the eastern holdfasts that the raiders who had burned 3 villages had been driven back to the sea, and it was she who had ridden out to meet them. She who had stood on the broken wall at the ford and turned the line when grown warriors had faltered. They called her many things in Valemora. Now, the Silver Lady, the warden of the ford, the queen, the old king, had named his heir with his dying breath. Though she had come to his gates a stranger 3 winters past with nothing but a pendant and a will like iron. When she lifted her hand, the square fell silent. Only then, as she turned her head and the torchlight caught her face, would anyone from the far north have known her. Older now, harder about the eyes, a thin white scar along one cheekbone that had not been there before, but it was Rien. The silent girl who could not shift had built herself a kingdom out of the ashes of the night she left, and she was silent no longer. It had come to her in exile, in the worst hour of the worst night, alone and half frozen in a Valemoran wood, with the raiders' hounds baying behind her. When there had been nothing left to lose, her wolf had finally risen. But it had not risen like any wolf the elders had ever described. It had come in silver, pale as the moon that made it, larger than the great grey wolves of Caldrec, and where it walked, the frost bloomed and the lesser wolves lowered their heads. The scholars of Valemora had gone pale over their old books and spoken of a bloodline thought, long ended, a moon-born line that surfaced once in 5 generations, and only ever in grief. Rien did not care what they called it. She only knew that the thing the pack had shamed her for lacking had been waiting inside her all along, waiting for her to have no one to give it to but herself. She had learned to command it in the season since, though it still frightened her a little, the size and the cold of it, the way the world went quiet and sharp when the silver rose behind her eyes. On the broken wall at the ford, she had let it rise in full sight of her own men and the enemy both, and the raiders who had never run from anything had turned and run from her. She had not shifted to win the battle. She had shifted because for the first time in her life, she had a self-worth showing, and no one left alive who could tell her to hide it. She had told no one in Vilemora the whole of where she came from. They knew she had come from the north. They did not know she had once been promised to a king, and they did not know the name of the man who had chosen another woman in a courtyard under a full moon. That part of her she kept locked away, the way she kept her mother's pendant locked in a drawer she rarely opened. It was done. She had buried it, and she had built a life on the grave of it, and she did not intend to dig it up again. She finished speaking to her people, promised the Eastern holdfasts grain for the winter, and went inside to the warmth of the high hall, where her steward Doran was waiting with a face she had learned to read. The sane gray and silver envoy who had once knelt in northern mud for a stranger's pendant now served as her closest voice, though neither of them had ever once spoken aloud of the courtyard where they first met. He had found her half dead in that wood. He had brought her to the old king's gates. He had never asked her for the story, and she loved him for it, in the plain and steady way you love the person who was there when no one else was. "Something has come," Doran said, and set a sealed letter on the table between them. Rienne broke the seal without looking at it, her mind still on grain and winter. Then she saw the mark pressed into the wax, a running wolf beneath a plain circlet, and the whole warm hall went cold around her. She knew that seal. She had watched it pressed into 100 letters at the elbow of the man who owned it. She had studied his hand once, when a fever left it shaking, and guided the wax herself, and he had thanked her with his eyes closed. 3 years and half a continent, and the sight of a running wolf in red wax could still reach across all of it and close its fingers around her throat. Doran was watching her, with the careful stillness of a man who has just seen something move behind a friend's face. "My lady," he said, "you have gone, pale as ash. Do you know this house?" "The Alpha King of Caldrek requests safe passage," Doran said quietly, watching her hands. "He and his retinue mean to cross into Vilemora within the fortnight. He is coming here, my lady. He is coming to your gates." The name she had given Vilemora was Marin. Rienne had died in the snow the night she left Caldrek, as far as the world was concerned, and across 3 long winters she had let that death stand. Marin was the name she had spoken to Doran when he found her half frozen in the wood. Marin was the name the old king had learned to trust, then to love as a daughter, then to speak from his deathbed when he named his heir before the whole of the court. Only one person alive knew the name that lay beneath the name, and that person was herself. And she meant to keep it so until she died in truth. So when the letter with the running wolf came, she told Doran nothing of what it truly was. She said only that Caldrek was a hard northern power, and that no king crossed half a continent for the sake of courtesy. She told him to grant the safe passage, to open the high hall, to double the watch on the eastern road, and to ask no questions where she gave no answers. Then she went to the drawer she rarely opened and took out her mother's pendant, and she held it in her fist until the edges bit her palm. She already knew why he was coming. She had not been idle in her exile, and Valemora's eyes reached far. She knew that the treaty marriage had not made Caldrek strong. She knew that Verum the warlord had used his daughter's place at the king's side to plant his own men in every hall that mattered, until half the north answered to Threnhold in all but name. She knew the reavers who had burned her eastern villages were only the leading edge of a greater host gathering across the northern sea, and that they had already begun to fall upon Caldrek's coast, and that an Alpha King with a hollow crown and a father-in-law for an enemy could not hold both a coast and a court at once. Corvin was not coming to Valemora to renew an old acquaintance. He did not know he had. He was coming because he was losing, and because the one power that had broken the reavers at the ford was hers. There was a bitter justice in it that she turned over in her hands like a cold stone. 3 years ago the Council of Caldrek had judged her too weak to stand beside a king. They had wanted a Luna who could make the pack strong, and they had gotten one, and the getting of her had cost them everything they thought she would buy. Now, the strong king, with his strong bride, was riding south, with his hand out, and the wolfless girl he had passed over was the wall he hoped to hide behind. She had not prayed for this. But if the moon had arranged it as a lesson, she thought she understood the shape of the lesson well enough. He came on a gray afternoon, with the first snow riding the wind. Rienne received him from the high seat of Valemora, and she did not rise. That was the first thing she had decided. Days before, lying awake, she would not rise for him. Let him climb the long hall under the eyes of her court and come to her. Let him be the one who crossed the floor. He looked older. That was her first cruel comfort. The years had cut lines beside his mouth and threaded gray through the dark of his beard, and the easy certainty she remembered had gone out of him, leaving something harder and more tired in its place. He wore travel black and a plain sword, and the silver circlet she had watched settle on his brow the year the old Alpha died. He walked the length of her hall with 24 men of the north at his back, and when he stopped before her seat, he inclined his head the exact and measured degree that one crown power grants another, and he said, "I thank the Silver Lady of Valemora for her safe passage. I have come a long way to ask for her help." His eyes moved over her face and found nothing. There it was, the thing she had braced for and could not have braced for. He looked at her, full in the face, from 6 feet away in the light of her own fires, and he did not know her. To Corvin of Caldric, she was a stranger, a scarred southern queen he had heard tell of, the warden of the ford. 3 winters and a new name and a face gone harder had buried Rienne so completely that the man who had once known her better than anyone alive looked straight through her. She had thought that would be the thing that hurt. She discovered, sitting very still on her high seat, that it was instead the thing that set her free. "Welcome to Valemora, King of Caldric," she said, and her voice did not shake at all. Her voice was cool and even, and entirely her own, and she watched him hear it, and register nothing but a queen. "You have come a long way indeed. Tell me what a northern king wants badly enough to beg for it in a southern hall, and I will tell you what it will cost him." A murmur went through her court, pleased. Corvin's jaw tightened at the word beg, and for a moment the old fire showed in him, and she was glad of it. Then he mastered it, the way a man masters a horse he can no longer afford to lose, and he began to speak of the Reavers and the coast, and the alliance he had ridden south to buy. She let him talk. She sat above him and let the King of Caldric plead his case in her hall, and she thought, with a calm that surprised her, I could refuse him, and watch, and no one in the world would know why." Then he paused between one sentence and the next. His nostrils flared, just slightly, the smallest catch of breath she would have missed if she had not spent her whole girlhood learning to read him. Something crossed his face that was not part of any speech, something raw and confused, and suddenly terribly awake, and he stopped speaking altogether and stared at her as though the floor had shifted beneath him. "Forgive me," he said, very low, almost to himself. His voice had changed. "For a moment I thought—" He did not finish it, but his eyes had stopped seeing a stranger, and they would not leave her face. Rienne kept her composure because she had built her whole second life out of composure, but underneath it something had lurched badly, out of place. She knew what she had seen cross his face. She had felt the twin of it herself, low beneath her ribs, the instant he entered the hall. The pull, the old wordless tug she had told herself for 3 years she had killed and buried. It was not dead. It had only been sleeping, and the nearness of him had woken it, and now it lay awake and straining in her chest, like a hound that has caught a scent it will not be talked out of. She ended the audience before it could betray her. She told the King of Caldric that Valemora would consider his request, that he and his men would be housed as guests while the turns were weighed, and that she would give him her answer in due time and not before. Then she rose at last, and left the hall by the door behind the high seat, and she did not let herself hurry until the door had closed. In the cold stone of the passage she stood with her back to the wall and made herself breathe. There were 3 secrets now, and every one of them could undo her. The first was her name, the girl she had been, the courtyard under the moon. The second was the bond, this thing waking in her, that she could not afford and would not name. And the third was the deepest of all, the one even Vailmora did not fully know, her wolf. The scholars had begged her to keep it hidden, and for once she had agreed with them without argument. A moon-born wolf had not walked the world in 5 generations. Kings had gone to war over rumors of far less. If Corvin learned that the Silver Lady of the Ford was such a creature, he would want her for Caldrec the way Verum wanted the passes, as a weapon, as a thing to be owned, and she had not clawed her way to a throne of her own to become any man's weapon. She had beaten the Reavers as a woman on a wall with a sword and a rallying voice. And let the world believe that was all it had been. The silver had risen only at the very end. In the dark, seen by few, she meant to keep it that way. The next morning Doran found her on the eastern rampart before the sun was fully up. Watching the road the northerners had come in on. "You did not sleep," he said. It was not a question. "My lady, I have served you 3 years, and I have never once seen you afraid of a man. You were afraid of that one before he opened his mouth." Rienne did not turn from the road. "I am not afraid of him," she said. "No!" Doran agreed, in the careful voice he used when he had decided something and was giving her the chance to speak before he did. "You are afraid of something. And a king does not ride south into a stranger's kingdom on the word of a queen he has never met. He came here certain Vailmora would help him. Someone told him it would. He watched the side of her face. Or, he came because he already knew who ruled here." She felt the ground go thin beneath the question. For one moment she almost told him. Doran, who had knelt in the mud for her pendant before he ever knew her name, who had carried her out of the wood on his own back, who had never once asked. He had earned the truth 10 times over. But the truth was, a stone that once rolled would not stop, and it would gather her wolf, and her name, and the whole of her buried life as it went. He knew the old king, she said instead, which was a lie, and hated herself a little for how easily it came. "Nothing more than that. See that his men are watched, Doran, and let me worry about the king." Doran looked at her a moment longer. Then he bowed and left her to the cold, and she knew she had not fooled him, only asked him to pretend, and that he had agreed because he loved her. It was not the same thing as safety. And there was a cruelty in the bond she had not expected, a thing the elders had never thought to warn her of, because they had never dreamed she would have a wolf to feel it with. It grew worse with nearness, and worse with time. The first day, it had been a tug. By the third, it was a low constant ache that sharpened whenever he entered a room, a pressure behind her breastbone that made it hard to hold her voice level, and harder still to keep the silver from stirring behind her eyes. She had spent 3 years learning to command the wolf. Now she spent every hour in his presence, commanding it not to answer a call. She could feel it straining toward. It was like holding a door shut against a wind that never dropped. She did not know how long her arms would last. She could not avoid Corvin entirely, and she was too proud to try. Vailmora was weighing an alliance, and an alliance meant tables and maps and long, careful hours in the same rooms. So she sat across from him and spoke of grain shipments and troop levies and the tides along the northern coast, and she was magnificent at it, and the whole time the pull sat in her chest like a coal. And the whole time she felt his eyes return to her face when he thought she was not looking. On the 3rd day of it, he reached across the map to mark the ford where the Reavers had broken, and his sleeve fell back, and she saw the old scar on the inside of his wrist, the one from the winter the wound had festered, the one she had cleaned and bound herself in a cold room a lifetime ago. Her hand moved before her mind could stop it. She caught herself a breath from reaching for it. She turned the motion into smoothing the map, and she thought she had covered it. But when she looked up, Corvin was not looking at the map, or at the scar, or at her hand. He was looking at her throat, where her mother's pendant hung in the light, and every trace of the color had gone out of his face. He knew the pendant. She saw the moment it landed in him, saw the years fall away behind his eyes, and for one endless heartbeat, neither of them moved or breathed. Then, because she was who 3 winters had made her, Rienne set down the marking stick and said, in a voice of perfect and boring calm, "You have lost your place on the map, King of Caldrec. The fort is here." It broke the spell by refusing to acknowledge there had been one. Corvin blinked, dragged his gaze from the pendant to the map, and after a moment that cost him visibly, he made himself go on. But something had changed in the room, and they both knew it, and when the maps were rolled away that evening, he did not leave with the rest of his men. He stood at the window of the council chamber, looking out at the snow, and she found she had not left either. They were alone, for the first time in 3 years. "I had a friend once who wore a stone like that," he said, without turning. He was still looking at the snow. Her mother left it to her. "I have not seen its like since." He paused. "She has been dead a long time now. I am sorry for your friend," Rienne said. The lies sat in her mouth like a coin. "More than I have ever told anyone." He turned from the window then, and the tiredness in him was terrible to see. "Do you know, Lady of Valemora, that a man can do the correct thing, the wise thing, the thing his whole council swears is the only thing, and be right in every particular, and still have it rot the heart out of him for the rest of his life? I did the right thing once. I have been paying for it ever since, and so has my pack, and I am beginning to think the paying will not stop until there is nothing left of either of us." She should have said something cold. She said, "What do you mean? So has your pack." He was quiet a while, weighing her, and then he seemed to decide that a stranger at the far end of the world was the safest confessor a king could ever have. "My wolf has gone silent," he said. The words hit her like cold water, because they were her own words. The pack's old, cruel word for her, turned now upon him. "Since my marriage," he went on, low, as though he had never said it aloud, and was not certain the room could be trusted with it, "a bonded pair is where an alpha's strength lives. The pack feels it, the way you feel the sun, without looking at it. Mine feels that there is no bond, and so they feel a king, who is only half of what a king should be. And Verum feels it most of all, and he has spent 3 years teaching them to feel it louder." He looked at his own hands. "My wolf has not run under a moon since the night I chose. Some nights I cannot feel him at all. An alpha, whose wolf will not rise, is a dead man who has not yet been told the hour of it." There it was, laid bare. He had chosen Saskia for strength, and in doing so had hollowed out the very strength he chose her for, because he had turned his back on the one bond that would have fed it. He had done to himself, in the end, exactly what the pack had once done to her. He had called a part of himself silent and worthless, and set it aside for the good of everyone, and it had ruined him. "You should not tell me these things," she said quietly. "I am a stranger, and a queen you have come to bargain with. I could sell every word of this to Varum by morning." Corvin almost smiled, and the almost of it was worse than weeping. "You could," he agreed, "but you will not." He studied her with those tired, dark eyes as though she were the first honest thing he had seen in years. "I have sat in 100 halls full of people who wanted something from me, and I have learned to smell it the way I smell rain. You do not. You looked at me across your own map and saw a man losing everything, and it made you angry on my behalf before it made you glad. I do not know your name, lady, and I do not know why a southern queen should care what becomes of a northern fool. But I have not been seen by anyone in 3 years, and you have been seeing me since the moment I walked into your hall. It is the only kindness I have been shown in a very long time." She had no answer to that. It was the truest thing anyone had said to her since the old king died, and he had said it to a woman he thought a stranger, which meant he had not said it to buy her. He had said it because he had seen her seeing him, and had wanted her to know he saw her back. She understood him completely. That was the danger. Standing in the snow light of her own council chamber, Rienne looked at the man who had broken her, and for the first time she did not see the king who chose another. She saw a person as maimed as she had once been, by the same blade, and something in her, that she had kept clenched for 3 years, began treacherously to open. Far to the north, though neither of them yet knew it, the thing Corvin feared was already moving. Varem, the warlord, had not let his king ride south to save Caldrec. He had let him ride south to be gone from it. A rider had left Threnholt the same day, carrying a sealed word to the Reavers on the coast, and the word said only this: "The wolf has left the door open. Come." Varem wanted the king broken between the sea and the passes, so that when both had done their work, there would be a widow of Threnholt blood on an empty throne, and a warlord's grandson to follow her, and no Corvin left anywhere to say otherwise. But that was the north, and this was the south, and in the south it was snowing, and a king and a queen who had once been promised to each other stood in a quiet room and did not know how close they were standing until it was already too late to step back. "You have not asked my name," Rienne said. She did not know why she said it. It was the most reckless thing she had done in 3 years. Corvin looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said softly, "I find I am afraid to." And when he said it, his hand had come up, without his seeming to know it, and come to rest, for the briefest instant, against the back of hers where it lay on the sill. It was nothing. It was the lightest touch. And it went through her like the silver rising, a jolt straight to the sleeping thing beneath her ribs, and for one blinding instant she felt not her own feeling, but his grief and his exhaustion, and beneath both a wild and disbelieving hope, and she knew from the way his breath stopped that he had felt it too. Rienne pulled her hand back as though the sill had burned her. "Good night, King of Caldrex," she said, and walked out of the room with her spine straight and her heart in open riot, and did not let herself run until she was well beyond the reach of his hearing. She did not sleep that night, or the next, and on the 3rd night she gave up pretending she would and went down to the council chamber where the map still lay, because it was the only room in her own kingdom that felt like anywhere at all, now that he was in it. He was already there. Of course he was. She had known he would be. The way she now knew a great many things about him, she had no business knowing, felt at the edge of her, a warmth off to one side, like a fire in another room. Corvin stood at the cold hearth with a cup he had not drunk from, and when she came in, he did not pretend surprise, and neither of them spoke of the hour or the impropriety of it, because they were past such small lies with each other, and had been since the moment his hand touched hers. "I keep thinking," he said, "that I have met you before. In another life, perhaps." He turned the cup in his hands. "I do not believe in other lives. And yet, do not," she said. "Please." "Why not?" he asked, and crossed a little of the distance between them, and she did not move away, which was its own kind of answer. "Tell me why not, lady, and I will never say it again. But you feel it too." "I have spent 3 years being certain of nothing, and I am certain of this. Whatever is between us, you feel it too, and you have felt it longer than I have." The bond pulled at her like a tide going out, and she was so tired of standing against it. For one reckless breath she let herself lean into the warmth of him, let the distance close until there was almost nothing left of it, until she could see the gray in his beard and the old scar on his lip, and the disbelief, and the wanting bear on his face, and she thought, "I could have this. After everything, I could simply reach out and have this." She reached out, and Corvin stepped back. It was gentle. It was the gentlest refusal in the world, his hand coming up between them, his eyes closing as though the stepping back cost him more than the wound he did not yet know he would take. "I cannot," he said, low and ragged. "Not because I do not want to. Moon, help me. There is nothing I have wanted like this in my whole life. That I am a married man, lady, bound before my pack, to a woman I do not love and cannot free myself from. And you are a queen in your own hall, who has shown me nothing but honor. I will not repay that by making you a thing men whisper about. I will not make you less to have you. You deserve to be chosen in the light, before everyone, by a man who is free to choose you. I am not that man. I gave up the right to be that man 3 years ago, and I have regretted it every single day. Since he meant it as tenderness, he meant it as the highest respect he had. He could not have known, could not possibly have known, that he had just said to Rien, the one thing in all the world she could not survive hearing twice. Because she had heard it before. She had stood in a courtyard under a full moon and watched this exact man decide that the right thing, the honorable thing, the thing that cost him everything, was to turn away from her. He had not chosen her then, and he would not choose her now, and both times he had a reason so good and so noble that she could not even hate him for it, and that was the cruelest part, that his goodness was the blade, that he would break her heart with impeccable honor and expect her to admire the workmanship. Something in her went very cold and very still. "You are right," she said, and her voice was a stranger's, smooth as river ice. "It was a moment's foolishness. The hour is late, and we are neither of us at our best." She stepped back from him, all the way back, and gathered the queen around herself like a cloak. "Vialmora will grant your alliance, King of Caldrec. Troops and grain and ships, on terms, my steward will bring you in the morning. You will have what you came south for." She looked at him without anything in her face at all. "That is what you came south for. Let us both remember it." Corvin flinched as though she had struck him. "Lady," he said, "that is not. I was a fool once, for a man who wanted me and would not choose me," she said, and she was too far gone in the cold to hear how much she had given away. "I buried that girl a long time ago. I will not dig her up for you. Good night." She left him standing at the dead hearth, with his ungentle honor and his impossible face, and she walked back to her chambers through the sleeping keep, and she did not weep, and the not weeping was worse than weeping would have been. She had thought herself healed. That was the discovery that undid her alone, in the dark of her own rooms. She had built a kingdom, and beaten an enemy, and worn a crown. And she had believed the girl in the courtyard was 3 years dead and buried under all of it. And then a tired man had stepped back from her with the gentlest refusal in the world. And the girl had sat straight up in her grave, as though no time had passed at all, with the same wound weeping in the same place. All that building, and she had only built a house over the wound. She had never once closed it. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until the dark bloomed with light, and she made herself a promise she had made once before, and broken. Never again, not for him, not for anyone. She would seal the alliance, and she would send him north, and she would go back to being the Silver Lady, who wanted nothing, and could therefore lose nothing, and this time she would mean it. Behind her, in the map room, Corvin stood a long time in the dark, and turned one sentence over and over in his hands. "I was a fool, once, for a man who wanted me, and would not choose me." He had heard the words before. He could not think where, but his silent wolf had lifted its head at the sound of them, and for the first time in 3 years, deep down, where he had stopped listening, something had begun, very faintly, to howl. The alliance was sealed the next morning in cold and perfect courtesy, and neither of them looked at the other while it was done. They would have gone their separate ways within the week. Corvin would have taken his troops and his grain and his ships back to the north to fight a war he could not win, and Rien would have watched him ride out of Vialmora as she had once watched him choose another woman, and that would have been the end of it. A wound closed over a splinter aching forever. That was how it should have gone. Verum did not let it. The warlord had planned for the alliance to fail. When word reached him that it had not, that the Silver Lady of the Ford had thrown her strength behind his king after all, he understood that his whole design had slipped, and a man like Verum did not grieve a lost plan. He made a new one. If Corvin could not be broken between the sea and the passes, then Corvin would simply have to die in the south, far from any wolf who might avenge him, and the Silver Lady with him, so that Vailmora's terrible strength died stillborn before it ever marched north. The killers came on the fourth night over the eastern wall in the dark of the moon. There were 6 of them, southern coast men in Threnhold pay, and they were very good, and they had been told exactly which windows were the queen's. They had bought a servant of the keep to leave a postern unbarred, and they had studied the changing of her guard for 3 nights, and they had come on the one night in the moon's turning when there was no light at all to catch a blade. Rienne was awake when they came, because she was always awake now. Sleep had gone from her the day Corvin rode into her hall and had not come back. She lay in the dark, listening to the ordinary sounds of her keep at rest, and it was the absence of one of those sounds that saved her life. A single sentry, the one who paced the gallery outside her door and hummed under his breath because he thought no one could hear him, had gone silent. She had heard that man hum every night for 3 years. She was already out of the bed and reaching for the blade she kept beneath it when the first of them came through her door on soft feet, expecting to find a sleeping woman. She was not a helpless girl. She had held a wall against the Reavers. She killed the first man before he had crossed the room and wounded the second, and she called the silver up into her blood to end the rest. And this was the danger she had feared for 3 years, that she would have to become the moon-born thing in front of witnesses, and in that moment she did not care. She would tear the roof off her own secret to survive. But the silver takes a breath to rise, and they did not give her the breath. The third man came at her from the side, while the second still had her blade caught on his, and she saw the edge of his knife catch the faint light, and she knew, with the cold clarity that comes at the very end, that she was not going to be fast enough. Then Corvin was there. He must have heard the fighting from the guest wing. He must have crossed half the sleeping keep at a dead run on a body that could barely carry him up a flight of stairs, because he came through the broken door with no wolf and no armor and nothing in his hands but a sword. A man 3 years silent. A king whose own body had turned traitor. He did not weigh it. He did not stop to think that his wolf would not rise to save him, that he was only a wounded man against trained killers, that the sensible thing was to call for the guard and hold the door. He saw the knife going toward her and he put himself between Rienne and the knife. He took the strike that had been meant for her, turning it into his own side at the last instant, and he made no sound at all, and he put the man who had thrown it down before he could pull back for another. Then he turned, gray-faced and swaying, and put the next one down as well, moving on will alone, where the body had no more to give. By the time Rienne's silver finally rose screaming through her blood, there was only one attacker left for the wolf to take, and she took him, fast and final. And then the room was quiet, but for the sound of her own ragged breathing, and it was over. The room was very quiet. Corvin sat down against the wall as though he had merely grown tired. He pressed a hand to his side and looked at it with a kind of distant surprise. That, he said, was closer than I would have liked. And then the strength went out of him all at once, the way it leaves a body that has spent the very last of itself, and he slid sideways to the floor of her chamber, and something in the way he fell was wrong, too sudden, too complete, and Rienne, still half silver, still shaking with the change, dropped to her knees beside him and pressed both her hands to the hurt and felt beneath her palms the terrible truth of it. The weapon had been forced through wolfsbane and silver. She could sense it now, sharp beneath the hurt, the one poison a wolf cannot heal and a moonborn wolf cannot draw out. It was a thing made to kill an alpha, and it had struck a man whose wolf was already silent, whose wolf could not even try to close the wound, and there was no healer in Vailmora who had ever treated such a thing. And the king of Caldrak was slipping away on her floor, because he had spent the last strength of a body that had failed him to put himself between danger and a woman he thought a stranger. "Stay," she said, pressing down, her voice breaking on a word she had never once let herself say aloud to anyone. "Corvin, stay." Do you hear me? You do not get to do this. You do not get to die in my hall to spare me. Stay. His eyes found hers, already going distant. Funny, he murmured. You sound just like her, and his eyes closed. They carried him to the warmest room in the keep, and Rien did not leave it. The healers came, the sharp-eyed woman who had served the old king and two others, and they cut the wolfsbane blade free and packed the wound with everything they knew, and none of them would meet her eyes, which told her everything. A wolf could survive a wound like this if his own body fought beside the healer's. Corvin's body would not fight. His wolf, the thing that should have been burning the poison out of him from the inside, lay silent and would not wake, and so the poison had the whole of him to itself, and it took its time. Keep him cool, the sharp-eyed woman said. Keep him easy, speak to him if it comforts you, and then, more quietly at the door, do not hope too hard, my lady. I have seen strong wolves die of less. Rien sent them all away by the second night. She told them she would tend him herself, that she did not know whom she could trust with a wounded king while assassins walked her walls, that no one was to come or go from the room without her word. It was true, all of it. It was also that she could not do what she needed to do with anyone watching. Because when the healers had gone and the door was barred and it was only the two of them in the firelight, Rien took Corvin's burning hand in both of hers, and let the silver rise, just enough to warm her blood, and pressed his palm flat against her own chest over her heart, and tried, with everything the moon had made her, to give him something of her strength to hold on by. She did not know if it was possible. The scholars had never written of such a thing, and the ones who had written of moon-born wolves at all had written mostly of ruin, of grief, of the terrible things such creatures could tear down. None of them had thought to ask whether a thing strong enough to break a wall might also be strong enough to hold one up. But when their skin touched and the bond flared open between them, she felt his pain become a little less, felt the fluttering, failing rhythm under her hands, steady by some small degree, and she understood that the bond was not only a torment, it was a bridge, and she could carry things across it. So she carried, hour after hour, night after night, she poured what she was across that fragile bridge into the dying man. She learned the rhythm of it, when to press her strength into him, and when to let him rest. The way a woman learns the breathing of a fever, she will not let win. She did not sleep. She did not eat unless Dorian stood over her and forced it, and she snapped at him when he did, and he forgave her, because he could see what the tending was costing her even if he could not see how it worked. She talked to Corvin the whole time because the healer had said to speak to him, and because once she had started, she found she could not stop. She told him about Vale Mora. She told him about the ford. She told him small, useless things. The color of the lake in autumn, the name of her favorite horse, as though a steady stream of ordinary words could be a rope thrown to a man going under. And perhaps it was, because every time she fell silent the failing rhythm under her hands stumbled. On the fourth night, his fever climbed past anything the cloths could touch, and he began, in his delirium, to talk back. He did not know where he was. He did not know who held his hand. He thought he was in the north, years ago, and the woman in the dark with him was someone else. And the things he said to that someone else broke Rien apart, quietly, on the floor of her own keep. I should have fought for you, he said, to the fire, to the dark, to the woman he could not see. They told me you could never be Luna, that the pack would die for want of strength, that a wolfless bride was no bride at all, and I believed them, because believing them was easier than fighting them. He turned his head on the pillow. Rien, I have said your name into the dark every night for 3 years. I chose the pack and I lost you, and the pack was never once worth what you were. If you can hear me, anywhere, I am sorry. I would give the crown, and the wolf, and every year I have left, to walk the pines with you one more time, and choose differently. Rien knelt beside him, with his hand pressed to her heart, and the tears running silently down her scarred face, and she understood the thing she had refused to understand for 3 years. He had not failed to want her. He had wanted her, the whole time. He had simply been too afraid, and too dutiful, and too young in his grief, for a father barely buried, to be brave, and he had spent every day since paying for it in a coin she had never once thought to check whether he was paying. He had not thrown her away. He had lost her, and mourned her, and never stopped. He talked on, in and out of the fever, and each thing he said was another small stone taken off a weight she had carried so long she had stopped feeling it as a weight at all, and only felt it as the shape of herself. He told the dark that he had gone back to the pines the morning after she vanished, and found her footprints in the frost going out and none coming back, and had stood there until the sun melted them. He told the dark that Saskia had asked him once, early and only once, whether there had been someone before, and he had not been able to lie to her, and neither of them had ever spoken of it again, and that was the whole marriage in a single silence. He told the dark that he had kept her mother's pendant in his mind so clearly that he had known it across a council table 3 years later on a stranger's throat, and had told himself he was going mad, because the dead do not come back wearing crowns. "I am here," she said, before she could think better of it, her mouth against his burning knuckles. "I hear you. I am here." Corvin went still. For a moment his fever cleared, the way a storm will open onto a patch of impossible calm, and his eyes half opened and found her face in the firelight, and something in them reached toward recognition across 3 years and a wolfsbane fever, and a new name and a scar reached and almost closed its hand around the truth. "Brienne," he breathed. "Are you?" The fever took him back under before he could finish the question, and when it broke at last, near dawn on the 7th day, he did not remember asking it, but he lived. That was the thing that mattered, and the sharp-eyed healer said it plainly, wonder in her voice. "He should be dead, my lady. By every law of the body I know, he should be dead. Something is keeping him in the world that I cannot account for." She looked at Rienne a moment too long. "Whatever it is, do not stop." Rienne did not stop, but she also could not go on as they were, in a barred room in a keep where assassins had come over the wall, and so, as soon as Corvin could be moved, she took him away from the court entirely, to a place she had not shown another living soul. Deep in the pine woods above the northern shore of the Great Lake, there was a lodge the old king had built for himself and forgotten, and it had become, across 3 winters, the one place in all of Vale Mora that belonged to Rienne alone. She went there to be no one. She went there to let the silver run under the moon, with no eyes on her. And now she brought the King of Caldrec there, on a litter through the snow, with only Doran and 2 men she would trust with her life, and she set about the slow work of bringing him back. It was slow. The wolfsbane had done what she had feared. Corvin lived, but his wolf had gone from silent to something worse, buried so deep beneath the poison that he could not feel it at all, and a wound in his side that a wolf would have healed in days would keep him from a horse for months. He could walk only a little and only leaning on her. For an alpha king, a soldier, a man who had measured his whole worth in strength, it was a kind of death he had to wake to every morning. She knew that death. She had died it herself, year after year in the frost, kneeling and feeling nothing rise, and so she gave him the thing that no one, in all her silent girlhood, had ever thought to give her. "You are not your wolf," she told him, on a gray afternoon by the lake, when the despair was so heavy on him he could barely lift his head. "I know what they taught you. Strength, bloodline, the beast under the skin, as though a man were nothing but the animal he can become. It is a lie, Corvin. I have known the strongest wolves in the world to be cowards and cruel. I have known a wolfless creature to hold a wall. That grown warriors fled." She took his face in her hands and made him look at her. "Your worth was never in the wolf. If it never wakes again, you are still the man who put his body between a knife and a stranger, without stopping to think that is not the wolf. That is you, and it is worth more than any crown." He looked at her as though she had handed him water in a desert. "Where," he said hoarsely, "did you learn to say a thing like that?" She almost told him. It rose in her throat, the whole of it, her name, and her wolf, and the courtyard, and the 3 years, all of it straining to be spoken. She had never wanted anything the way she wanted in that moment, to simply be known by him. "I learned it the hard way," she said instead, "as all the true things are learned." The days at the lodge became something she had no name for. She taught him, as his strength crept back, to fight again as she had once had to fight, as a man and not a beast, with a blade and a clear head and the ground chosen well. She had a sword made for him at the forge in the valley, plain and perfect, and balanced for a man who could not count on a wolf, and when she put it in his hands, he held it for a long moment and could not speak. They walked the frozen shore together a little farther each day. They talked the way they had talked over the maps, and then more than that, and then in the way of two people who have stopped being able to imagine the other one gone. She did not let him kiss her. She did not kiss him, but the lodge filled up with all the words for it that they were not saying, until the air was thick with them. And then, on the 9th evening, a rider came down the valley through the snow, half dead from the pace, with mud to his chest and Vilemora's own seal, and Doran brought him in without a word, and the look on Doran's face stopped Rienne's heart. The rider went to one knee. "My lady," he said, "the north has fallen." The Reavers landed in force at the turning of the moon, 10,000 strong, and Caldrec could not hold the coast without its king, and Threnholt did not march to help. He swallowed. "My lady, the warlord Verum has taken the crown. He rules the north now in the name of his daughter, and he has put it about in every hall from the sea to the passes, that the Alpha King Corvin is dead, murdered in the treacherous south, and that any wolf still loyal to the old king is a traitor to be hunted down." Corvin had risen from his chair, swaying, gripping the plain sword she had given him. His face had gone white, as the snow beyond the window. Then Rienne saw the rider hesitate, saw him glance at her before he spoke the last of it, and she knew that whatever was coming was the thing that would change everything. "There is more, my lady," he said. "The one who sent us the warning of it all, the one who smuggled word of her own father's treason out of Caldrec at the risk of her life. It was the Luna, it was Saskia herself." They sat late in the lodge that night, with the fire burning down the three of them, Rienne and Corvin and Doran, and pieced the whole shape of it together at last. Saskia's letter, carried under the warning, told the rest. She had married Corvin at her father's command, a girl of 18, with no more choice in it than a horse has in its harness. She had known within a month that the bond would never come, that her king grieved another woman in his sleep, that the marriage was a door her father had propped open to walk his own ambitions through. She had watched Verum hollow out the pack from the inside, watched him teach the North to despise its own king, and when at last she understood that her father meant to have Corvin killed and rule through her as a widow, she had done the one brave thing left to a woman with no power of her own. She had betrayed her blood to save a man she did not even love, because it was right, and because she would not be the crown on her father's head. "Free me," her letter ended. "You never wished this marriage, and neither did I. Whatever you do now, do it free, and go quickly. He means to be crowned under the full moon, and a thing crowned under the full moon in the old way cannot easily be undone." Corvin set the letter down with a hand that was not quite steady. "I misjudged her entirely," he said quietly. "For 3 years I thought her my enemy, and she was only another prisoner of the same man." He looked at the fire. "I have spent my whole life misjudging the women I was bound to, not seeing what was in front of me, until it had already cost everything." Rienne thought of the golden woman in the courtyard 3 years before, gracious and composed with her hand in the king's, and how thoroughly Rienne had hated her, and how little that hatred had ever had to do with the truth. Saskia had been 18 and owned by her father as surely as a field or a horse sold into a bed. She did not want to buy her father a foothold, and she had spent 3 cold years married to a man who wept another woman's name in his sleep. And when the moment came that she could have kept her crown by staying silent, she had thrown it away instead, to save the life of a man she had every reason to resent. There was a strength in that, which had nothing to do with any wolf, and Rienne, who had spent 3 years learning exactly that lesson, felt something in her turn toward the distant woman that was almost like kinship. "We were both his prisoners," she said quietly. She never knew it, but she and I were fighting the same man from opposite ends of the same chain. Corvin turned to Rienne then, and there was something new and terrible in his face, a resolve she recognized because she had worn it herself the night she left Caldrec. "I have to go north," he said. "You know that I do. My people are being hunted for the crime of remembering their king. Saskia risked her life for a man she owes nothing. I cannot sit at a warm fire by a lake and let it stand." He drew a breath. "And you cannot come with me." There it was. The second time in her life that this man had looked at her and decided for her own good to leave her behind. "You will not order me," Rienne began, the cold rising in her. "Listen to me," he said, and took her hands, and for once she let him. "I am a broken king, with a buried wolf and one sword, riding north to a crowning I will very likely not survive, to try to take back a throne from a warlord with 10,000 reavers at his back. That is my road, and I have made my peace with it. But you," he gripped her hands harder, "you are the Silver Lady of the Almora. You have a kingdom that loves you, a people who need you, a whole good life you built with your own 2 hands out of nothing. I have already cost one woman her place in the world by tying her to me. I would sooner die on the northern road than cost you yours. Stay here, rule your kingdom, live, and let me go and pay what I owe." He meant it as the greatest gift he had. He was trying with the last of himself to do for her the brave thing he had failed to do 3 years ago. He did not understand that he was doing the cruel thing, again wearing the brave thing's face. He did not understand what he was asking her to survive. And Rienne, looking at him, finally understood the choice that had been coming for her since the letter with the running wolf first crossed her table. She could let him go. She could stay safe and queenly and whole in the kingdom she had built and keep her wolf secret and her name buried and her heart behind its wall, and she would live a long life and a good one, and she would never once be foolish again, and she would watch this man ride north to die for the second time she had let him leave, and she would never, ever forgive herself. Or she could burn all of it, the secret, the safety, the careful buried self. She could pick up everything she had protected for 3 years and set it down for him, and follow him into a war she might not survive, as the thing she truly was. She looked at Corvin's tired, resolved, beloved face, and she opened her mouth to tell him, at last, everything. "My name is Rienne. I never died. I am the woman you grieve, and I have a wolf now, and I am coming with you, and I am done being left." She got as far as his name. The lodge door slammed open on the wind, and Doran was there, and behind him the red glow of torches through the trees. Too many torches, and his sword was already drawn. "My lady," he said, "they have found us." Threnholt colors, coming up the valley. He looked at her, and at the king, and at the sword in the king's hand, a great many of them, and we are very few. There was no time left for the truth, and so Rienne gave them the truth in the only language there was time for. She walked out of the lodge alone, into the snow, into the ring of torches and the 40 riders of Threnholt, who had come to make certain the king of Caldrec stayed dead, and she stood before them, small and unarmed, in the falling snow, and she said, in a voice that carried over the whole valley, "You have come to the wrong Queen's Woods." And then she let go of the door she had held shut for 3 years. The silver rose. It came the way it had come that first terrible night in the wood, only now she did not fear it. Now she called it up gladly, and it broke over her like the moon itself coming down, until where a woman had stood there was a wolf out of the oldest stories, pale as the moon that made it, vast and terrible and beautiful. And the frost bloomed on the snow where it walked, and the horses of Threnholt screamed and reared, and the men who had come to kill a broken king, looked upon a moon-born wolf risen in wrath and understood, too late, exactly what they had walked into. It was not a battle, it was a reckoning. And when it was done, those few of Threnholt's riders, still able to sit, a horse fled back down the valley, to carry the tale north. That the Silver Lady of Vale Mora was no lady at all, but the moon come walking. And that she was coming, and that she was not alone. Corvin stood in the door of the lodge and watched the great silver wolf turn and pad back toward him, and he did not run, and he did not flinch, and when it lifted its head and looked at him with eyes he had known his whole life, his knees nearly went out from under him. Because deep in his chest, buried 3 years under poison and grief and duty, his own wolf had lurched awake at the sight of her, and was straining toward her and howling. The silver wolf shifted back, and Rienne stood before him in the snow, and did not bother to hide anything anymore. "It was always me," she said. "In the courtyard, under the moon. The girl you would not fight for. I did not die, Corvin. I ran. And I learned that the thing they all swore I lacked was inside me the whole time, waiting for a night when I had no one to give it to but myself." She lifted her chin the way her mother had taught her. "My name is Rienne, and I am done being left behind." For a long moment, he could not speak at all. Then Corvin crossed the snow between them, the distance he had failed to cross in a courtyard 3 years before. And this time he did not stop, and this time nothing on earth could have stopped him. He took her face in his hands as though she were the only real thing in a world of snow, and the tears stood open on his face without shame. "It was you," he said. "It was you the whole time. I grieved you every day. I said your name into the dark 1,000 nights." He pressed his forehead to hers. "I will spend the rest of my life fighting for you, before the whole world. In the light. I swear it, on the wolf you just woke. Only let me choose you now. Please, let me choose you now." "I choose you," Rienne said. "That was always the part you left out. It was never only for you to choose. I choose you." And she kissed him. It broke open like a dam, and the whole of him poured into her, and the whole of her into him. 3 years of grief and guilt and buried love, rushing across the bridge at once. And beneath it, rising to meet her silver, came his own wolf at last, wakened by the completed bond, uncurling and stretching and lifting its head after 3 years in the dark. She felt the moment it healed him. She felt the poison lose its grip, felt his buried strength come flooding home, felt the man in her arms become whole in the space of a single kiss. When they broke apart, he was standing on his own, straight and unleaning, and there was a wildness in his eyes that had not been there in years. "My wolf," he said, wondering. "I can feel him. Rienne, I can feel him." "I know," she said, and smiled through her tears. "Welcome back. Now let us go and take back your kingdom. Together this time?" They rode north, within the week. The king of Caldrec and the moon-born queen of Vale Mora, at the head of the army Vale Mora had sworn, and every wolf in the north who still remembered a rightful king. Saskia opened the gates to them from the inside, and stood free at last, while the man who had made a harness of her life was dragged before the pack he had betrayed. The hollow marriage was set aside without protest, for a union the moon had never blessed with a bond was no true marriage at all, and Saskia was the gladdest of anyone to say so. Verum, the warlord, had crowned himself under the full moon in the old way, and boasted that it could not be undone, and he was right that it could not be undone by law or by counsel. But it could be undone by a moon-born wolf in front of the whole assembled north, and it was, and the reavers he had invited were driven back into the grey sea and did not return. They held the true crowning in the spring, in the courtyard of Caldrec, under a full moon, in the same place. A king had once looked past a silent girl and chosen another. The whole of the pack came. The council that had called her worthless came, and the elders who had used the cruel word behind their hands, and every wolf who had ever looked through Rienne as though she were nothing. They came, and they watched their king take the hand of the woman they had thrown away, and they watched a wolf of silver rise, where they had sworn no wolf would ever rise, and they understood at last, every one of them, the size of the thing they had been too small to see. The girl they had judged too weak to stand beside a king had come back the strongest wolf any of them would ever behold, and she had not come back for their forgiveness, and she did not need their blessing. And that was the whole of her revenge, and it was complete. Rienne felt none of the old ache as she looked out over them. The courtyard had once been the place where her life ended. Now, it was only stones and old walls, and a great many people who had learned too late to profit by it what they had lost. Corvin's hand closed over hers, warm and sure, the way it should have 3 winters before. Through the bond, she felt what he felt, steady and bright, and without a shadow left in it. No grief now, no guilt, only her, and the moon, and the whole rest of their lives. They had each been passed over once, and buried once, and left for lost. But they had found their own way back from the dark, and they had chosen each other at last in the light before the whole world that had once looked away. Not because duty demanded it, or a council allowed it, but because they wanted to. And that, stripped of everything else, was the only choosing that had ever mattered. Thank you so much for listening to the end. I really hope this one stayed with you. Tell me honestly, do you think Corvin ever truly deserved a second chance after he let her walk away that first night? Or did Rienne give him one more than he had earned? I would love to know where you land, so tell me in the comments, and if her story moved, you stay with me, because the next one is going to hit even harder. I will see you there.